Hello, this is Dr. Tom Gruber from the National Community Rights Network, and I'm here with Will Falk. And Will Falk has done something really extraordinary. He's a lawyer. He was a public defender in Milwaukee, and he is a poet. And his passion in poetry is to record the way the land is speaking. So he's a naturalist, and he feels that the largest and most pressing issue confronting us today is the destruction of natural communities. And he's received a Society of Professional Journalists San Diego chapter 2016 Journalism Award and is currently living in Utah. And Will is a member of an organization called Deep Green Resistance. And he and his friends in that movement have filed a lawsuit against the state of Colorado to grant rights of nature to the Colorado River. And this is a groundbreaking, first of its kind lawsuit, and we're really fortunate. There are very few people who are thinking this way right now, other than what we call the community rights movement. And what we're seeing here is that an environmental organization is beginning to adopt thinking that's more than just superficial sort of political party, you know, like a lot of the environmental organizations are really like Democratic Party operatives. You know, they want to keep everybody inside the Democratic Party. They don't want to have anyone escape from the reservation so to speak. They want to keep everything controlled and confined into predictable ways of thinking and behavior. And Will has left the reservation, and I want to welcome this extraordinary man here. Will, thank you so much for the work you're doing and for the more advanced thinking that you have embraced.
It's my pleasure. I'm really happy to be here, and I would just like to say thanks to you and your listeners too for all the great work that you all are doing for community rights. It's great work.
Well, thank you. So when I read your article, and can you give us the location of the article actually, because I took that out when I made the copy of the article.
Yeah, it's published on a great a blog or website called San Diego freepress.org. And that is run by some great people, citizen journalists in San Diego. It's a great place, not only for my one article, but for all of their work.
Yes, and I'll include a link to that article, and maybe will allow us to publish it in full. But this is, this really caught my attention. And so, Will, could you talk a little bit about your experience? Because you talk about how basically lawyers' hands are tied within the current system of law.
Yeah, I went to law school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison with the idea that I would use my law degree and my license as a lawyer to create real change. And I learned pretty quickly as a public defender in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that I was nothing more than a battlefield medic. I was rushing around trying to save one individual person from a racist criminal justice system at a time. And there was very little I could do to create the kind of systemic changes that are really needed in the legal system to create true justice in the United States. So I ended up leaving the public defender's office and actually sold most everything I owned, put it in a 75-liter pack, and started traveling to the front lines of different environmental movements, pipeline blockades, construction blockades, and that kind of thing. And I learned through those experiences what I call the true nature of power. we can try to convince other people within government or within the legal system to do the right thing, or we can do it ourselves. We can take the power that we have in our own hands. And at places like pipeline blockades, they're not relying on a judge to stop a project. They're just actually stopping the project by putting their bodies in front of the construction equipment. So after a couple of years of that, I was lucky enough. I'm a member of an organization called Deep Green Resistance, and Deep Green Resistance is really committed to the notion that the most important things that we can be doing are protecting the water that we all need to survive, the food that we all need to survive, air, the basic natural communities that sustain our lives. We have to protect those, or social justice doesn't really mean anything. And Deep Green Resistance also has spent a lot of time looking at the environmental movement and what has been effective within the environmental movement. And if you date the environmental movement with Rachel Carson's publication of Silent Spring in 1962, we've now had 55 years to be successful or to create a sustainable home for ourselves. But the truth is we're failing miserably. Every indicator of ecological collapse is intensifying. We're losing topsoil faster than it can be replaced. We've cut down as much as 99% of the old growth forests in this country. And we've just failed to be effective. The tactics that we've used haven't worked. So the way that the rights of nature and our lawsuit comes into this is the rights of nature targets the notion that nature is property. So the American legal system treats nature as property, and treating nature as property, nature becomes something that is consumed or destroyed. And this conception of nature as property is one of the major reasons why we're in the mess that we're in. To address that and to give nature its own subjective value, its own subjective worth, we filed this lawsuit, which is about recognizing the Colorado River as a person, just like corporations are recognized as persons under American law, and just as individual human citizens are recognized as persons under the law. And we hope that this tool will help the American legal system come to grips with ecological reality, bring the legal system into the 21st century, and actually give us an effective way to respond to the collapse that we're seeing all around us.
Yes. So the principles of the rights of nature are really sort of they're really in opposition to the current system of law in a lot of ways. For instance, if you own more property, then you can destroy more nature because that's your, quote, property right, you know. Like here in Colorado, if you supposedly if you own the mineral rights underground, that you can go into somebody's yard and dig a fracking well and poison and kill that person legally, and that's the way things are set up. So it's all set up for extraction, and any person or animal, or I know that in Deep Green Resistance, you all refer to animals as persons. We might want to get used to the idea of referring to rivers as persons someday, as well as trees. You know, the idea is that, you know, there are certain things about life that are necessary for life to survive. And if we're completely human, you know, oriented, and we don't regard the rest of the universe as life, for us to survive, you pointed out that we need clean water, clean air, clean earth, you know, clean food, so on and so forth. And, you know, these are fundamental rights, but they're also inalienable rights. And when you look at an inalienable right, and you look at the way government and law is set up, the inalienable rights are not protected as a rule. I mean, we think we have rights in the, you know, in the amendments to the federal Constitution, the Bill of Rights and so on. We think that we have rights. But apparently what I see there, and this is a technicality, but it appears that we don't, because those rights basically don't prevent us, they don't protect our rights to be free from exploitation from corporations. The amendments protect us from being exploited by our government, so to speak. So it appears to me that the corporations are government actors, which are there and given immunity from, you know, the threats of communities and individuals and so on, you know, so that they can exploit and enrich the empire, is the way that I look at it. Am I on the right track at all here?
Yes, I think you absolutely are. I think that there's kind of two main points and two main paths to go down with what you were saying. I think the first one starts with disabusing Americans of the notion that their government was formed to protect them. I understand that this is a deeply held belief that many people have. We are taught that we live in this democracy, and that because we're citizens of the United States of America, we are guaranteed certain rights. We're guaranteed liberty. We're guaranteed you know, all the different freedoms of speech, freedoms of religion, those kinds of things. But I think a better way to think of this, and I'll go into the history of this to show why this is actually historically true, but a better way to think of this is we are told that we have these rights in an attempt to pacify us and to actually keep us from really looking behind the curtain and seeing what's actually going on. So a lot of people, especially activists, will be out there and we'll hear people talking about, you know, they can't do this in America, they can't do this in the United States, or people will invoke the rhetoric of the American Revolution and say the forefathers fought and died to give us these freedoms. But that's not actually what happened. I think people need to look back and understand what was happening during the American Revolution. There is a great indigenous writer, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who wrote a book, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. And she really, one of the theses of her research is that the American Revolution was fought because rich white men along the eastern seaboard were angry at the British government from keeping them from crossing the Appalachian Mountains, where the British government had signed treaties with indigenous peoples. And the best way that they could think of opening up that land for exploitation to, in fact, set up corporations with that land was to fight a war with Great Britain, win that war, and then open up that land to exploitation. So from the very beginning, this is at the roots of the formation of the American Republic, so to speak. Then we also need to understand that the first kind of guiding document in the United States were actually not the Constitution, but the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation set up a system of government where local state governments had more power, had all the power actually, to govern their own communities. And after about 12 or 13 years, again, powerful white men realized that this wasn't going to be good for business, because if you had, at that time, 13 colonies, you had 13 different sets of laws that you had to obey. There wasn't going to be any interstate commerce. This was going to be really hard to make any money if you had to go into each place and follow their laws. So they came up with this idea of a strong central government, the federal government, and they drafted the Constitution, which they drafted in secret in Philadelphia. People don't know that there were armed guards that were there to keep the public from understanding what was going on. And they come out with this new constitution, with this new government that ensured corporate power. And thankfully, there were enough aware people in the United States at that time that said, this constitution is going to steamroll working class people, is going to steamroll everybody but the landed white men that held power at the time. And that's where we get the Bill of Rights. And because those people were so effective in their own organization, because they were so bold, they instituted the Bill of Rights, which give us all these traditional freedoms that we at least nominally have. So then the second part about this is how do we understand, we need to understand what rights actually are. So you were talking about how we have these rights, and we think that these rights are protecting us from exploitation. But again, we need to understand what a right is, how it operates, and why it maybe isn't exactly what we think it is. And I've taken to defining a right as the ability to step into court and ask the court to use the power of the state, which includes armed men and women with guns, to enforce a certain decision. So we can think about this in a very small way. If I buy a deed of property, and I show up there, and there are people who have built houses on that and are living there, I can go into court. I have a right, property owner's rights, to step into court, say, I bought this deed, I have the right to this land, those people need to get off, and the court can order police to go remove those people from that property. Now, what is so horrific about the current arrangement of power, and what has emerged as a tradition in American law is since the 1880s, corporations have been defined as persons with the rights of persons in American law. So corporations can go in with their deeds of property, and they can tell people that they have to move, and they can invoke men and women with guns to do their bidding. The problem with this is corporations are not people. Corporations are an abstraction. They are a legal theory that were designed, in fact, to limit the liability that individual wealthy business owners could use to protect themselves when something in their business hurt someone else's rights. So, a really good example of this is a mining corporation. If you want to buy a mine, if it was your individual rights that were at stake, or your individual liability was at stake, and you own the mine, and that mine collapsed, well, you would individually be responsible to the families of the miners who died. Well, a corporation shields you from that. And if you do something, if you're negligent in your business practices and miners die, no one can approach you personally for liability. And so then how does this play out for nature? Well, the natural world has long been the victim of business. That businesses make money, businesses gain their power by exploiting the natural world. For the Colorado River, the easy ways to think about this are 80% of the Colorado River's water is used by industrial agriculture. These are large ag corporations. So they cannot operate without stealing that water from the Colorado River. They cannot operate without the American courts recognizing their rights to take that water. So if we're going to turn the environmental ship around, if we're going to actually save the natural communities that give us life, we're going to have to target those rights that privilege corporations' ability to exploit the natural world over human and non-human communities' rights to exist.
Right. That's exactly it. So now the failure that we've come up with in the, quote, environmental resistance movement, the activists, the reformers, the people who've come before us, the failure has been to recognize that that reality that you just described. You know, we typically haven't looked under the hood to see that this whole thing is engineered from the very start. This whole system is encoded in the DNA of the actual founding legal documents of this country. And so it's a systemic problem. It's not a personality problem, you know? So we've got the favorite personality villain of our time, Donald Trump, you know? And okay, so Trump, I don't like Trump, you know, and so we've got all these people on one side trying to make him look like an idiot, which, you know, maybe he is or maybe he isn't. But I mean, the story, the narrative is that Trump is an idiot and he's a racist and he's a Nazi and on and on and on, you know. And then you've got the other side of the game that's like, oh, we need better regulations. We need to be, you know, regulating all this harm. I mean, it's just so harmful. We need to reduce the amount of harm, you know. But there's, you know, no conversation going on about actually stopping the harm, you know. And it's an assumption that the economic and the political and the judicial and the legal and all the system that we have in place is necessary. And that the economic system is separate from the political system. We can't even talk about it, you know. And so the thing about it is that our economic and political system, you know, people need to understand that it's not a moral system. So like typically our activism up to this point has been directed toward making a moral argument, you know. So you go to your elected representatives and you say, this is immoral, this is unjust, you can't be doing this, this is too obvious, you know, you're gonna destroy everything, and then they go ahead and do it. And you think, how could they do that? I mean, these people are so horrible, they're so immoral. And what they don't realize is that they're just, you know, corporate state actors. They're just administrators for a system that's so much bigger than they are, and so necessary for them if they're going to pursue a political future. They have to buy into this narrative, and the whole system is designed for, you know, public relations through the media, you know, judicial, you know, lawmakers, quote, you know, legal experts who are making the laws for us stupid people who can't make our own laws. On and on, it just goes on and on. So it's all set up to reinforce the status quo. And if you go against the status quo, then you're going against the Constitution of the United States, which all of our, you know, protectors, establishment protectors, the police and the military and the legal people and the government people, they're all sworn to uphold, you know. And So, you know, and it's almost as if that document is sacred. You know, it's like it's there. We're sworn to uphold it against everything. It can't change. There's no way we can change it. We're here to uphold it. This is our legal and our moral obligation because it's such a sacred document and all this kind of stuff. And so that's kind of where everyone is now, on the more conservative end of it all. And on the liberal end, then you've got people who are just like, you know, wanting better regulations. But, you know, in the regulatory system, you know, what would you imagine if people are going to regulate the Colorado River, for instance? I mean, isn't that what we're doing right now? What would we do? Just like steal a little less water so it can exist a few more miles into the desert and still not get to the Gulf of California? I mean, what's going on? I mean, you know, does the Colorado River, did you ever ask the Colorado River if it wanted to be dammed?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
These are essential questions. You know, like who, you know, did you get permission? Did you ask permission? You know, and I think that the assumption is that we have permission, that we are the you know, that we have dominion over the earth because the Bible told us so. You know,
Yeah.
so we don't have to ask permission. God gave it to us.
Exactly. Yeah. And that what you're talking about is what I would call a culture of human supremacy. So we're not. You were asking, did people think to ask the river permission to dam her? And we are so insane in this culture that it would never even occur to most people that the river has a subjective being, that the river has an existence that is as valuable to her as you and my existences are to me. In fact, more valuable for the amount of life that she sustains by being a river. And people, you know, people laugh at this notion that the Colorado River should be recognized as a person, for example. But this is not a new idea. In fact, this is one of the most ancient human ideas that have allowed us to survive for as long as we can. And I can prove this very easily. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been around for hundreds of thousands of years now. We have not evolved in very different ways since then. I think that one of the only things that's happened is we've developed a lactose tolerance. So people looked and thought and had the same brains as back then as we do now. Well, they lived for hundreds of thousands of years without destroying the planet. It's only been the last 10 or 12,000 years when this insane idea that humans are somehow separate from the natural world, are somehow above the natural world, and in fact have a right to destroy the natural world, that have landed us in the mess that we're in. I'm sitting here looking out at the Red Rock Desert of southern Utah, where it was primarily the Ute people who lived here when European settlers got here. And this is of course the desert. This isn't an easy place to live in, but they lived, and they lived well here. There's a reason why the Ute people resisted European settlement so strongly, is because they had a way of life that really worked for them. And that way of life was as I understand it, rooted in the idea that the natural world is sacred. The natural world has as much right to exist as you or I do. So we use this language of the rights of nature, and that is a term that is very specifically used today because rights fit within the modern American legal perspective. But this notion that the natural world needs to exist and with its own subjective being, with its own life path, is nothing new, and is something that we think that the lawsuit gets us a little bit closer to. We're not just hoping that human cultures learn to live with this respect for for the natural world. Either we're going to return to that perspective, we're going to return to that way of living, or we're not going to exist for very much longer, and we're going to take out a hell of a lot of life with us. And for me, like I said, we've had 55 years in the modern environmental movement to realize that what we've been doing isn't working. We need to make these changes fast before more is lost.
Yeah, and fortunately for the National Community Rights Network, we have access to the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which has helped us in different ways here in Colorado. Like, they've helped us with what we call a Community Bill of Rights. We started out with running that as an initiative in Lafayette, Colorado. And that Community Bill of Rights gives the environment the right to exist and flourish. And it's actually a ban on fracking. That was the original intent behind it. And the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund came in and helped us write that. And we got it elected. And then they were going to help us defend it. And then the city council, who before that was elected, voted unanimously to pass a resolution opposing our Community Bill of Rights. They colluded with the state and with the oil and gas industry to prevent the people who wrote the thing, got it elected, from having any position in court to defend it in that lawsuit. So the city did some sort of superficial defense based on who has the right to regulate fracking, but and lost, of course, in court. When the real argument was that we have inalienable and fundamental rights, that we have the right to breathe clean air and drink clean water, and the right to peaceful enjoyment of our homes, and the right to local self-government, and the right to enforce laws, to write and enforce laws that protect those rights. And in fact, that the people of Lafayette have the right to enforce those laws if their local government fails to do so. So that was a huge breakthrough for us. And of course, then the oil and gas industry sued. We couldn't intervene in the suit, and we got overturned. So then we thought, oh well, then the problem then is more. Of course, we expected it, and so the next level of defense from the legal front was to run state amendments. And in our state amendment, of course, we give nature the right to exist and flourish too. And so we're not about taking away rights that already exist. We're about building on that and, ultimately making these basic, fundamental, inalienable rights the foundations of our legal system, so that law and government is there to expand and defend rights, fundamental rights. And your discussion about rights, I think, is really important, because people think, well, that means that if you have the right to have some property, then you could use that property to hurt us, right? So like if you owned property that has a river on it, you could screw with that river and cause it to overflow and wipe out our farmhouse or whatever it is, Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you do have this inalienable right to enjoy, the river, because, you quote, own the property upon which it travels, but you don't have the right to use that property to destroy some other person, or some other part of nature, you don't have that right. That's a violation of an inalienable right. So the idea is to set up law so that everybody wins, so everybody's rights are honored. And so life can exist and flourish. And going back to the Native Americans, and I think about that, they had a system set up so that everybody got fed and everybody got water and everybody had a voice, There was a self-determination. Each tribe had its own rules, and they ran things the way they ran them in Utah, which was different than the way they ran things in Ohio, something like that, And so, in reality, I think possibly the origins of our legal system came back, was traced back to some principles of Native American law. The original Articles of Confederation, I think were, based on some Algonquin law, that existed at that time. And the settlers at that time, the colonists who were there, recognized that these things were working because these people lived there for many, 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 many thousands of years, and still look around and see all these beautiful resources and all this clean water. And, you think about that movie, The Last of the Mohegans, and the Native Americans are running through the woods and the mountains and everything. And then they stop at a lake, and they all together plant their faces in the lake and take a giant drink. And that's the way water used to be. And you think about it now, I mean, most of us are afraid to drink the water that comes straight from nature because it's going to have some giardia in it, or some kind of, here in Colorado, there's like thousands and thousands of abandoned mines, they're leaching heavy metals into the water systems. And, and you're afraid to drink the water because you could get poisoned by heavy metals, or you could get poisoned by, unfriendly bacteria that's growing there because the environment is polluted with substances that feed that bacteria and allow it to exist and flourish. So this is a powerful thing. It's a powerful idea. And what is your end game? Do you want to grow your movement? You want to grow the deep green resistance movement so that people are willing to look deeper into solutions rather than go along with the same old systemic devastation that's currently going on?
Yeah, I mean, the most important goal that we have is to see the Colorado River flourishing and regenerating and restored to the place where she existed for tens of millions of years. So that, above everything else, I think you always have to define your goals in measurable physical terms in the real world. So it doesn't mean very much if the Colorado River is recognized as a person in federal courts if there are still dozens of major dams that keep her from reaching the Gulf of California and Mexico. It doesn't matter if people say they love the Colorado River if she's still being poisoned as she is. So more than anything else, we see the lawsuit as a tool, as a tool to turn to achieve those physical changes. I've recently written. I've been on the road now for 2.5 weeks, following the Colorado River, trying to understand her better, trying to understand what's going on along her whole life. And I've been writing about it, and I recently wrote that there are many different ways that dams can come down. We are trying to start with the court system. It would be a hell of a lot easier if a court could order government workers to remove a dam. But that's not the only way that dams come down. And if the American court system is not willing to make the changes that are so obviously needed, we're hoping people that are watching this can understand, that can see in the first person, can see up close and personal how the American legal system doesn't actually protect our interests, how the American legal system, as you were saying, protects corporate rights to exploit. So we want to encourage not just a rights of nature movement, which is a great thing, but we also want to encourage any tools that people have at their disposal to make physical changes in the real world. So that is really our end game. I mean, that being said, if there are communities that are following this, we just heard actually from writer Derek Jensen last night that he was contacted by a friend in the Great Lakes region, that they're working on filing a rights of nature lawsuit for the Great Lakes. So we actively encourage people to even lift the complaint that we've filed in the case. We've published this at a website called dgrnewsservice.org. You can find the whole text of the complaint. People can go in there and take language out of there and file it. We're encouraging that. And then at the same time, we want people to really start to think critically about whether their government exists to protect them. And if their government doesn't exist to protect them, then how are we going to protect ourselves?
Right. And that's what it comes down to is, you can't really trust the whole history of our system of government at this point. I mean, we've already outlined the basic DNA of our laws and our way of governance, as being something which protects property and commerce. That's it. Bottom line, right?
Right.
So, the big profits, the big capital that we need to keep this whole economy rolling, that is needed, that comes from extraction,
Right.
And so if you look at the mechanics of extraction around the Colorado River, the first thing is that the white men came in and took it away as a natural part of human communities' habitat, multiple human communities' habitats. Just took it away, just stole it. And so that's how capital is accrued. That's how our economic system was founded. That's how that infusion of capitalism was produced, was through theft, and murder was used as a way of facilitating that. But there were also some treaties and some laws and things that were enacted that were then, violated by the people that wanted the resources. So, we've got this economic system that's set up for exploitation. And so based on that, everything is around that. Everything is centered around that, rather than the right for life to basically exist without exploitation. And, life is, originally thought to be infinite. When people came over here to this country, they looked around, they said, holy cow, we'll never use up all this stuff. Let's just set things up so we can get as much of it as we can. And so the extraction industries, like, for instance, an obvious extraction industry is mining, And so mining has to go on, because we have to keep the big capital coming into the system. So if your river gets poisoned in the process, that's just inconsequential, really. what's really important is that this system keeps going. And so then if you need electrical power or you need irrigation water, you know, you got to have a dam. You really have to put these dams up. I mean, who cares whether or not the river ceases to flow, you know, down at the end of the river? You know, I mean, I don't know. I remember years ago I read something about the Colorado River, and you know, it's shortened by how many miles? I don't know. Is it 100 miles shorter than it was when it was originally flourishing? At what point does it stop now?
Yeah, it depends on how much snowpack has come that year, so it varies. But
yeah,
it only reaches the Gulf of California. It's delta. It only reaches it when all 7 states and Mexico agree to let a pulse of water go through.
Really?
Which means they agree to cut a little bit of usage for a short period of time to let it get there. And that's only happened a handful of times since the Glen Canyon Dam went in the 60s, actually. So, yeah.
Well, you think about that, and you know, I know that as a poet, you probably sat on the banks of the Colorado River and just been with the Colorado River, you know?
Yes.
Enjoyed the impulses of thought that occur at that time, you know? And you think about that moment of contemplation, and you think about where those thoughts come from, you know? And you think about the fact that humans are just a small part of nature, and that maybe those thoughts are not just coming from deep inside of you, but maybe the river is sharing those thoughts with you. Maybe the river is actually communicating with you. And maybe the thought is, I mean, to me, when I see, you know, a river like that, and, you know, I'm a little influenced by reading Derek Jensen myself, and that, you know, you sit there and you think, well, what does the river want? What is it telling me? And you look at the river and you say, well, the river's flow is impeded, you know, that's what it's telling me. It's telling me that once it was a great river and it just bounded through to the ocean, you know, and that there were many fish that swam upstream to spawn, you know, and it, you know, supplied the earth with more and more and more, you know, huge numbers of fish that we don't have now. And the birds that came up the river to feed on the fish, you know, pooped in the woods and fertilized the forests, and, you know, spread seeds around and regenerated the nature in that area. And you think about the bears that lived on the bank of the river that fed on the fish and fertilized the soil and the forests and spread the seeds. And you think about, you know, just the amazing amount of life that existed around that river. And then, you know, and then you go to some place like Lake Powell where there's no movement. And you ask the river, I mean, how do you like being stagnant? How do you like the fact that you're not moving here? And, you know, my thought comes that the river doesn't like it too much, that the river considers that part of its body to be dead or nearly dead.
Well, that's certainly something we found. We started in up in La Poudre Pass, north, just a little bit north on the north edge of Rocky Mountain National Park. And we started up there. Those are the headwaters of the Colorado River. And there's a little national park sign that says, you know, you're looking down at the headwaters of the Colorado River. And we were up at about 11, close to 12,000 feet, and there was already several inches of snow at the ground. So I stood there and watched big snow clouds come over and gather on the mountains, and I watched the snow come down, and you can hear the powder even then crystallizing and melting, and you can see the waters moving. But But also up there, the first thing you see is a big ditch, a ditch that is about 20 feet wide. It's straight and it runs across the Continental Divide. It's called the Grand Ditch, and it was dug in the late 1880s with hand tools and dynamite, mainly Japanese workers, actually. This was a horribly dangerous job. But the Grand Ditch takes water from the Colorado River headwaters and forces it over the Continental Divide to be used on the Front Range of Colorado.
Yeah.
So literally, from the exact moment of the Colorado River's birth, she's being exploited. She is born into a life of violence that is going to exist for the rest of her path down. From there, we went down to Grand Lake on the south end of Rocky Mountain National Park. Grand Lake is the largest naturally occurring body of water in the state of Colorado. Well, underneath Grand Lake is a tunnel that runs 13 miles underneath Rocky Mountain National Park, and water is pumped from the Grand Lake side through that tunnel over to the Front Range. So again, the river is maybe 15 miles old at that point, and loads of her water are being pumped over to the other side. And you drive a little bit farther on, and you get down to the Grand Valley Diversion Dam around Palisade, Colorado. And as you're going through, you're driving through a lot of Colorado's gas and oil fields. You're passing, if you follow the Yampa River over towards Vernal, Utah, there's two huge coal plants. And I'm traveling with a great photographer. Her name is Michelle McCarran, and I looked at her 5 or 6 days into it, and as the realization came over me, I was like, we are not following a river. The Colorado River is not a river anymore. It's a series of industrial projects. You're seeing a river that is harnessed and is controlled at just about every section of it. And this really conflicts, I think, with a lot of people's conception of the Colorado River. The Colorado River is the river that carved the Grand Canyon. The Colorado River is the river that supports life in the West. The Colorado River is this wild being that John Wesley Powell floated down in the 1860s and wrote his exciting adventure about going down there. That river doesn't exist anymore. That river hasn't existed in a long time. And to really feel that, to sit at her banks and watch her water going down, that water is the most fundamental source of life in the American Southwest for not just humans, which 40 million humans depend on it, but that water is life for everyone in the Southwest. And those waters are so resolute in where they're going that they've carved through Utah's Red Rock deserts. They've gone through the southern edge of Nevada, one of the driest places in the world. They've cut the Grand Canyon, and they are specifically going to deliver their fresh water back into the Gulf of California, where the water cycle on the ocean can start all over again. So yeah, to me, it's completely obvious that what does the river want? The river wants to deliver her water. She wants to be the source of life, but she knows how to do it. She knows how to do it a lot better than we do. She's been doing it for millions of years. We need to give her a say in our legal system. We need to give her a say in our way of government, so that she can return to being who she is. And we're hoping that the Rights of Nature lawsuit will help us achieve that once more.
Yeah. What we find is that you know, when we talk about, and you talk about in your article, the box of allowable activism. So that's what we chip away at in our community rights movement. It's the foundation of what we do, is the understanding of the box of allowable activism. And, you know, that's what's limiting us. All right. So that's why, you know, if, say, for instance, Granby is a town on the lake here in Colorado. And, you know, what if the people of Granby decided that they wanted to restore Granby to its original glory, you know, so it's not being sucked? And, you know, and I don't know what that is. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm just using it as an example. So let's say the city of Granby decides to pass a law granting Granby Lake the rights of nature, kind of like what's happening up in Lake Erie, you know.
Yeah.
You know, in Lake Erie, they're having these giant blooms of neurotoxic algae. They're coming in and clogging up the water systems and poisoning everything. And, you know, the source of that is agricultural chemicals, you know. So, you know, basically the farmers have this tremendous extraction industry that they've all mastered in terms of securing it in our legal system and giving them the right to water so they can dump everything they want on the land, poison the water, and it's legal, you know. So people in Erie have drafted a ordinance which is gives rights of nature to the lake there. What if Granby did that? Well, you know, Granby says, you know, we passed this ordinance, you know, we have the right to initiative. We wrote this, we circulated it, we passed it. It's our law. You know, we want to preserve our lake, stop sucking it, you know. And so what would happen? So, you know, the federal government would get alerted probably, but first the state government would be alerted. So tell us, what is the first thing that's going to happen when a community decides that the people themselves decide they want to grant the rights of nature locally, you know, to a body of water?
Well, if they want to use their city government to enact this local law, the first thing that's going to happen is their city attorney is going to tell them, you can't do this. This is illegal. This is literally illegal. If we go forward with this, the state of Colorado is going to sue us, and it's going to cost the city's taxpayers a lot of money to litigate this, and it will probably ultimately lose. So the reason, there's a few reasons. The box of allowable activism that you're talking about is this great way of explaining things that the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund has come up with. But there's kind of, it's a box, so there's 4 different walls that you run into. One of those walls is state preemption. State preemption, the word preemption is a legal term, and it means that, or what it does is it will not allow communities to pass laws that are stricter or put more regulations on corporations or business practices than the state actually does. It defines the relationship between municipalities and the state as one of a parent to a child. So state law preempts municipal law. Another thing that people are going to run into is if their ordinances infringe on corporate personhood, corporate rights. Right now, American courts, as I said earlier, American courts recognize that corporations have the same rights as persons. So American courts will say, actually, you can't pass this law because your law is infringing on corporate rights. The third thing that, especially in environmental cases like these, is nature right now is only defined as property in the American legal system. property is an object. Property is something that can be consumed and destroyed. And we're seeing the effects of defining nature as property. Nature as property turns a living river into so many acre feet of water. It turns acres of forest into so many square feet of lumber. And this conception of nature as property has to change. Nature has to be given an elevated status, has to be, at the very least, considered something that is as worthy of humans as having legal protections. Then the final thing that people will run into is the courts and state government and corporate lawyers. They'll start asking, why aren't you working through something like the Environmental Protection Agency, other regulatory agencies, the Bureau of Land Management, to come up with regulations that address your problems? And the problem with this argument is that the Environmental Protection Agency, the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Forest Service, these are organizations that were formed not to actually protect us, but to permit exploitative activities. They give out permits, which is literally permission to do harm. So a community can't say, let's say that there is some chemical out there that we know at any human exposure to it is toxic to humans and other animals. Well, if the EPA hasn't studied it in 25 years and says that no, actually at 20 parts per million, this is safe. Well, a corporation can pump that chemical into the Colorado River at 20 parts per million and be perfectly within the law. So these regulations, what they actually do is they give the appearance that the government is regulating things, but they're actually there to pacify the public, to keep them to kind of reassure them that, hey, we're watching this. Meanwhile, while we're watching this, forests are clear cut, the Colorado River is dammed, communities, industrial projects are forced over the heads of communities who don't want them there, and humans and non-human lives are destroyed. So yeah, those four things, that box, I think the best way to say what that box does, the box of allowable activism, is a way to explain why it is illegal for local communities to stop, to say no. What they're really robbed of the capacity to say no. And when you cannot say no, I mean, you know, feminist philosophers have really showed us this, but if someone takes your capacity to say no, then they have total power over you. They will dominate you. So community rights, like you're working on, the rights of nature, like we're working on, these are trying to break through that box of allowable activism. These are trying to remove us from that box and create a better framework that actually gives us power.
Right. And so in the work that we're doing towards systemic change, the most important thing first, in my mind, besides the fact that you go through the cycle of moral outrage and, you know, learning how the system works and figuring out that the elected officials on these big issues about, you know, extraction and exploitation and poisoning of your local community and stuff, they're all going to tell you their hands are tied because of these doctrines, okay? So then at the local level, we pass a law. It's, quote, preempted by the state. You know, the court says, sorry, you don't have the right to do that. So then, you know, if we go through the system and try and work the system, then the next thing you want to do is pass a state amendment that gives the local community the right to self-government so they can't be preempted, okay? So, we've tried that twice. It's practically impossible. And right now, I think we'll probably need a couple $1 million, because of a new amendment that was passed last election. In 2016, that makes it so that only the big wealthy people can run these initiatives. The local people, the people of Colorado are going to have to, spend a lot of their own money, pocket money in order to make this happen. Pretty much. And so, let's just envision that we're successful at that, because we've got a big enough movement started here in Colorado to, to pass an amendment to the state constitution that grants the rights of nature and the rights for communities to defend nature through their own local laws and so on. And so then what happens next? Now we've got a state amendment. So now they can't preempt us, right? So what happens next?
Well, you if they can't preempt you, you still have to deal with the other prong, or the other parts of that box.
Right.
The
federal law. Yeah.
Right. And the corporations, you try and strip corporations of rights. Well, you'll get, maybe judges just will refuse to honor that kind of jurisprudence. The other thing about state amendments is if you achieve that, that's great. But what happens when the next legislative session comes up and they undermine that amendment? So what I'm really getting at is,
right.
Eventually things will get appealed up to the American Supreme Court. And now you're talking about the Constitution. Now you're butting heads with the American Constitution, which privileges interstate commerce, which we have a 300-year history of case law, of precedent that says that is going to favor corporate powers to build the economy, will be the terms that are used. These corporations are granting or giving people jobs. They're going to say that, and they'll use the Constitution to shut down your state amendment. So, where I'm getting at is one of the great goals of the community rights movement is to start asking questions about how do we scrap the Constitution? How do we write maybe not even one new constitution? How does this continent become a continent of locally governed communities where people in Washington, D.C. can't tell the people living on the northern Colorado Plateau what's best for them? For me, or to make this smaller, people in Denver can't tell people in Durango what's best for people in Durango. And I think ultimately to return back to this notion that while the community rights and the rights of nature are a novel idea for many Americans, the people that lived here before Europeans conquered this place, they had a very viable system of local government. The great Sioux lawyer and writer Vine Deloria, who wrote a couple of different books, Custard Died for Your Sins and God is Red. One of his main points in God is Red is that one way that indigenous peoples achieved such a great history of environmental sustainability was the fact that they lived in their land for thousands of years, and they developed cultures and ways of self-government that were rooted right in the land where they were from. So a Ute person here in the Red Rock deserts of Utah would never think to tell a Sioux person on the plains of South Dakota what's best for how the best way to live is. So I think really what you're getting at is eventually for communities to really have power over themselves, we're going to have to take things on like the very the deity of American government, the Constitution. It's going to
Right.
have to be scrapped.
And that's a conversation that we want to see happen. That's our purpose in the National Community Rights Network. Our real focus is on basically amending or abolishing the federal Constitution.
Yeah.
And, we have on our website, National Community Rights Network .org, we've posted our suggested constitutional amendment for the federal Constitution. And that's the most conservative thing that we can think of. And, the real conversation, I think, really needs to be, what the hell do we need a federal government for in the first place? To protect us from ourselves? I mean, what are we doing here? Basically it was all set up as a fraud to make these wealthy landowners, these white men with slaves, most of them apparently, give them the right to keep their slaves and to keep their commerce, and to be able to, for George Washington to be able to export trees that he cut down from the Ohio River Valley across the eastern part of the United States to the coast, and put them on ships and send it off to places where they'd already cut down all their trees. And, England was a big source at that point. I mean, they wanted these tall masts, and they didn't have existing trees in England that would produce a mast for a sailboat. And so they looked at those trees and they went, holy cow, we can make a lot of sailboats this way. So, if we look at that and we say, well, do we want a federal constitution in the first place? Who wants it? Well, the wealthy, industrialist, capitalist, bankers, Wall Street people, big corporate heads, they all want, this central government to give them, the right to do commerce across state boundaries so they can export their logs to England, and to tell everybody what to do so that, this concentration of wealth and power is undisputed. So we can't have these little local communities going renegade and creating what they refer to when they criticize our work. They say, oh my goodness, we can't have a patchwork of laws. Everybody has their own laws. I mean, that's outrageous. How can we do, how can Walmart do business in your community if you have different labeling laws and different food, safety laws, and, you're requiring local sourcing? I mean, how can you do that? I mean, we do business with China. That's where we get all our, packaged food or whatever they say, and so the people in the local communities, for sustainability, if we really define sustainability in its purest sense, we have to look at people like Derek, who's going to say, well, the only sustainable culture that we've ever had on the planet, was back in the Stone Age.
Yeah.
So the reality is we don't have to live in the Stone Age, so to speak, but we can scale our economies, we can organize our lives, our communities, our whole civilization, so to speak, so that it's devoid of the terrible scar of the city living, which is requiring all this importation and exportation of resources. We can actually get into the land, we can listen to the land, we can write laws and operate in a way which is a cooperation between humans and nature. We can actually rejoin nature. We can be a part of nature. It's a hugely novel idea, right? We can just, like, instead of fighting it and destroying it and resisting it and exploiting it, we can just be it. And, and that's ultimately what creates a sustainable community, because the Native Americans living along the Pacific Northwest rivers, you know, they didn't want to destroy the salmon. They didn't want to build dams and take away their food source. You know, they didn't want to do that, you know, but humans went in, you know, like Americans, quote, Americans went in and dammed up those rivers so they could get what? Irrigation water and electricity. Is that it? And they said recreation because they wanted these big lakes so they could move their, you know, drive their motorboats around, you know?
Yeah, I think the way I would, the way I think about what you were saying is our human institutions, our human governments, our human cultures have to flow from ecological reality. They have to be rooted in a recognition that all life depends on the water we drink, the air we breathe, the soil that produces or the soil that grows our food, and the countless connections, the countless relationships that produce the natural world. So instead of asking how can we make ecological reality conform to human desires, we need to ask how do we build cultures that begin with ecological reality, that begin with the reality of the radical interconnectedness of life. And when we start asking that question, when we start seeing government through that lens, and we start seeing the way we should organize how we live through that lens, we come out at a very different place than where we're at right now. And if this rights of nature lawsuit can get people to start to think like that, then in some ways it doesn't matter in this case if the court grants our motion or our lawsuit wins, because if people start to think in the way I was describing, then people will start taking out dams. People will make it impossible for people in Washington, D.C. to tell them how to live on the Front Range of Colorado, that kind of thing.
Right. And that's what we mean by grassroots. You hear the phrase grassroots activism all the time now, and it's being used in the greenwashing industries, you know, to make it sound like if you are a member of the Democratic Party and you march against Donald Trump, that you're a grassroots activist, you know. And the reality is that grassroots activism is about making systemic change. And the first step is to make people conscious of something, to educate them. And so your lawsuit, it serves that purpose, because it's actually quite outrageous for people who have never seen anything like this before. When we had our state amendment reviewed by the Amendment Review Board, you know, the people in state legislature that sit there and they look at your amendment and they go, holy cow, this one guy read through it and he says, okay, so now you're giving ecosystems, you're giving nature the right to exist and flourish. Oh, I see. You mean property. You're giving property the right to exist. That's outrageous. You know, that's what they think, you know. And so it's going to catch people's attention and start them thinking. And if think about it, I mean, if this spurs a huge national debate or worldwide debate where people just start thinking, you know, they've already thought this way in places like Ecuador. You know, they've granted the rights of nature to the rainforest and the Amazon, you know, places where, you know, Standard Oil has gone in there and just torn the shit out of the place.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to regain a certain amount of nature by legalizing the rights of nature there. There have been legalization of the rights of nature for the Ganges River. And there's other projects like that have been going on around the world. So it's not a novel idea for us. And you're basically saying that that's an indigenous idea. It's something that was just a foundational way of thinking. Apparently, like for instance, in the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, when they teach the democracy school, which tells this whole narrative, if people want to know this inside and out, they want to take that class. It's a 2-day course, basically. But, they did it on an Indian reservation, and, the white people were just, we're just blown away by it. We can't believe it. And the Native American people, just like this one lady said, it's kind of unusual to us that this is even a conversation, that this needs to be made into a law. I mean, this is the way we've been thinking all our lives ever since the beginning of time for us. And, we don't need to make it a law. This is life. This is the way it is. This is truth, and the humans are all scratching their heads like, holy cow. And the Native Americans said, well, at least we know that we live on a reservation.
The privilege that European settlers are granted on this continent, not sometimes, I mean, all the time, it makes it hard for us to understand the structures of power that are destroying the planet, because those structures of power are benefiting us. They're not benefiting us as much as they're benefiting corporations, but I think that's the whole idea that I've heard many indigenous people say. You have to decolonize your thinking too, and yeah, I think that's something that really goes along with the consciousness, is just starting to recognize how limited our lives really are, and becoming angry about that.
Well, thank you for this. This is as you've said, and I've heard over and over again that this is groundbreaking work. This is the leading edge of environmental activism. This is where the people living all over the world need to sit down and ask the question, who gets to decide what goes on where they live? Do they, or does a corporate board, 10,000 miles away, in some city skyscraper, top floor of a city skyscraper, get to decide what goes on in your community, what goes on in the nature in which you live? And as long as we leave that decision making up to these giant centralized power sources, the more at risk we are, the faster things are going to fall apart, because those organizations are not moral. They're not intended to be moral. They're financial. They're intended to make a profit. And we need to make sure that we have our heads wrapped around the idea that that system is going to destroy everything ultimately, because we live in a finite system. And if we were to stop that and start building an entire culture around rights, around listening to the ecosystems and to the language of nature, and familiarize ourselves with that language, the people who spend a lot of time outdoors, they know that language. They can tell. They feel. They have senses. They have ideas. It's a whole different system of thinking that occurs when you actually experience unity with the natural world. Mm-hmm. And that's really should be the foundation of our law, the foundation of our governance, where we're actually in relationship with nature and not, the enemies of nature.
More than anything else, we need to recognize the power that we have, and we need to take that power into our own hands, because we don't have much time left. The living world doesn't have much time left, and we need to explore every option that we have to keep this place, our only home, left living. If that's the rights of nature movement, then let's get to work on the rights of nature movement. But if there's other tools out there pick those up too. Yeah, we need to win.
Well, thank you, Will. You know, you're a beautiful soul, and it's great to have you in the family. And let's stay in touch. If you have any new information you want to share with the National Community Rights Network and the rest of the world, we'll be really happy to, you know, help to facilitate that for you.
I really appreciate the time you took to interview me, and I love the work that you're doing, and thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the Colorado River.
Thank you, Will.